constituency now paying treble for their energy bills?
Well, Mr Speaker, I would point out that it's this government that has stepped in with £96 billion of support to mitigate the impact of those energy bills. But I completely disagree with the Honourable Lady's assessment on our record on net zero. And I would point out that when her party were in power, 7% of our energy supply came from renewable sources. It's now, if she'll let me finish the point, it's now just under 15%. That is the record of this government's this party's 14 years in power.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My honourable friend mentions the new industry of floating offshore wind, which has huge potential to create large numbers of high-quality jobs in places like Milford Haven and Port Talbot. Given that those two ports have both currently got bids in with the UK government to the FLOMIS port infrastructure scheme, which is going to be really keen to seeing this vision realised, when can these ports expect to hear back from those bids, please?
Minister.
I thank the Chair of the Select Committee and my honourable friend for that question. I'm delighted today the Crown Estate are hosting a Bidders' Day to drive forward plans for innovative floating wind projects in the Celtic Sea. The UK Government is supporting Flow through our Contracts for Different scheme, securing a long-term pipeline of projects in the Celtic Sea. I'd be happy to write to him with a further update on when more progress can be discussed.
Come to Shadow Secretary of State, Jill Stevens.
On the issue of energy mix, Mr Speaker, the Tata workers I met last week know the virgin steel they make is vital to supporting our renewable energy aspirations, like offshore wind in the Celtic Sea. So the loss of 3,000 jobs is a kick in the teeth for our proud, skilled Welsh steel workers. It will devastate local economies and the sovereign steelmaking capacity that would build the wind turbines we need. Yet the Business Secretary told us at the weekend that, and I'll quote, "It's not about the jobs lost." Does he agree with her comments?
Minister.
I'm sorry she's got me replying to that question, not the Secretary of State. I think what's important to recognise is that the investment from this UK government has saved thousands of jobs across the United Kingdom. Of course, the Transition Board is now working with the individuals affected in Port Talbot, and that is a proper and right thing to do. I'm glad that both the UK and Welsh governments are working towards that. That is absolutely the right outcome. And I think we need to think of these things in the wider context, which is our responsibility.
Joe Stevens.
She boasts about the Transition Board, but that only exists because of the government's failure to protect jobs and vital industries. But let me ask her this. Each year, Port Talbot provides enough virgin steel to deliver the UK's 2030 wind targets by itself. So when her government's intervention shuts the blast furnaces early, can she tell the House where that steel is going to come from? Will it be coming from India? And we will be surrendering our ability to create jobs, investment and cheaper bills here in Britain.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, it won't surprise you to learn that I completely disagree with the Honourable Lady's assessment. And I would point out that the Transition Board, this government has provided £80 million. We haven't seen any of the £20 million that the Welsh Labour government has promised. But indications so far are that moving away from iron making in the UK would not have a direct impact on national security.
Dr. James Davies.
Number 3, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With your permission, I will answer questions 3 and 7 together. The Welsh Government's policy on the blanket 20-mile-an-hour speed limit is damaging communities and businesses across Wales. Mr Speaker, all of us support 20-mile-an-hour limits if there is a safety reason outside schools or hospitals or old people's homes, but the blanket 20-mile-an-hour limit is, by their own figures, going to create a £4.5 billion hit to the Welsh economy.
Dr. James Davies.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In my constituency, bus services no longer serve Dizzeth High Street or Tweed Mill shopping outlet in Trevenant, and this impacts on some of the most vulnerable. Now, Riva have stated that it's the Welsh Government's 20-mile-per-hour policy which is a key reason for this. Does the Minister agree that the Welsh Government have failed in multiple ways to properly consider the impact of their policy and that they should repeal it in full?
Mr Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely correct. Not only have the Welsh Government not considered the impact of this on the economy, not only have they not considered the impact on businesses and commuters, but they've also failed to consider the impact on users of public transport, and we're seeing bus timetables across the whole of Wales being ripped up because of this daft policy. Mr Speaker, the Welsh Government seem determined, the Welsh Labour Government, to apply a handbrake to the Welsh economy.
Scott Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Blanket 20-mile-per-hour zones do not command widespread public support and as a consequence are widely ignored and unenforceable. Furthermore, there's very little evidence that they actually improve road safety or air quality. The rollout of this scheme in Wales has proved to be an utter farce. Does my right honourable friend share my concern that the Labour Party hasn't learned their lesson and would no doubt seek to impose this costly and disastrous policy in England were they to be elected?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely correct. Not only have the Welsh Labour government not considered this policy, they've ignored the fact that 468,000 people have signed a petition calling on them to reconsider, the largest petition in the history of the Senedd. And my honourable friend is absolutely correct as well to say that if a Labour government ever were elected in this country, and I certainly hope it isn't, it is inevitable that they will pursue anti-motorist policies such as the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, the ban on new roads being built, and congestion charges and emission zones being set up all over the place.
Al Williams.
Mr. Speaker, the South Wales Argus of the 28th of December 2022 informs us that the Secretary of State for Wales outlined his anger that the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit in Caerwent was not being imposed and enforced properly by the police. Is he still angry?
Mr. Speaker, I began this question by saying that all of us in this House support 20-mile-an-hour speed limits where there is an issue of safety, and I couldn't be more clear about that. What I don't support is a blanket 20-mile-an-hour limit, and alongside that, Mr. Speaker, alongside the blanket 20-mile-an-hour limit on 30-mile-an-hour roads, the Welsh Labour government are also using rather underhand methods to bring down the speed limits on perfectly safe dual carriageways from 70 miles an hour to 50 miles an hour. And this is what lies in store, Mr. Speaker, if Wales were ever elected as a government in the rest of the country.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, and thank the Minister for that response. Minister, quite clearly the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit that's going to be enforced in Wales will be a speed limit that restricts people from their movement. So has the Minister had any discussions with the Welsh Assembly in relation to providing more buses available to take people off and the buses and off the roads in their cars? And is there more provision as well for cyclists? If there isn't that provision, then this system just can't work.
Well, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, Welsh Senedd ministers don't seem very interested in reconsidering the policy. And frankly, there is an anti-motorist agenda with the Welsh Labour government, which has seen blanket 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, reductions on dual carriageways, congestion charges being considered, charging to use the M4, and most shockingly of all, Mr. Speaker, my own Labour council who are considering bringing back 7 bridge tolls.
Question 5, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have regular discussions with colleagues across government on rail infrastructure. The UK government is committed to building a strong rail infrastructure network across Wales, which will improve connectivity and drive economic growth. We have provided over £390 million for Welsh Rail in recent years and recently announced a further £1 billion to fund the electrification of the North Wales Main Line.
The Welsh Affairs Committee highlighted the need for greater connectivity between Swansea, Cardiff and Bristol, which would be of huge benefit, particularly for sports and music fans coming to Ashton Gate in my constituency. But why has the Wales Rail Board failed to initiate their recommendations and other further improvements?
Minister.
Well, the Honourable Lady's constituents will be greatly affected by that project that she mentioned, and also by the performance of Great Western Rail at the moment, which is not sufficient. The Office of Rail and Road has launched an investigation into poor train punctuality and reliability in the Network Rail Wales and Western region, and we await the recommendations of that review. But I would also add that industrial action has affected that.
Sir Michael Fabricus.
Will my honourable friend join me in congratulating Network Rail and their subcontractors for completing the repair works on the longest wooden rail bridge in Europe across the Malddach estuary in Gwynedd?
Minister.
I certainly will. I'm delighted that my honourable friend takes such keen interest in Welsh rail infrastructure and raises it here on such a regular basis. But he is absolutely right to flag that. That is an example of this government's record investment in rail infrastructure in Wales. I was pleased to go and visit that project and pleased to give it my full support.
Chris Elmore.
Number 6, sir.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 6 and 8 together. The government is investing £500 million to secure the future of steelmaking in Port Talbot for generations to come. It is one of the largest UK government support packages in history for steelmaking, and it will protect thousands of jobs, 5,000 jobs directly with Tata and many thousands more in the supply chain.
Chris Elmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week in the steel debate, the Secretary of State said he understands, and I quote, the devastation that people will feel in Port Talbot and in the whole community who face the job losses at the plant and beyond. Why is it then that the Secretary of State, or indeed the Business Secretary, didn't put in a red line over job losses while this work was done, especially with Tata this morning doubling down on those losses in the Welsh Affairs Select Committee? It's nothing short of a disgrace.
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman knows, Tata approached the UK government and said they were intending to pull out of the United Kingdom. If Tata had pulled out completely from the United Kingdom, it would immediately have cost 8,000 jobs and many thousands more in the supply chain. The government therefore acted to take the only deal which was available, which was to build the electric arc furnace and save thousands of jobs.
Alex Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think there are thousands of jobs going to be saved at all. The people of Teesside who saw the Tory government abandon them and end Virgin steelmaking at Redcar, leading to the loss of 3,000 jobs there, will sympathise with their colleagues in Wales. The failure of the same government will see Virgin steelmaking also ended in Wales with the loss of another 3,000 jobs and leave the UK even more reliant on imports, surrendering the market to other countries. Why would the government want to do that when steel is a foundation industry and, with the introduction of new technologies, could have a bright future?
Secretary of
Well,
State.
Mr. Speaker, I hope the honourable gentleman will be aware that 100% of the materials, the iron ore and the coke, which are used to produce steel in Port Talbot, are being imported from abroad, whereas at the same time we're exporting 8 million tonnes of scrap steel, which means that actually building an arc furnace to make use of that scrap steel is making us less dependent on other countries for our steel. And as far as the job losses are concerned, Mr. Speaker, the UK government have put aside a budget of £80 million combined with £20 million from Tata to support anyone who loses their jobs. Thus far, Mr. Speaker, we have not had one single penny towards that from the Welsh Labour government, who are, by the way, able to find £100 million to create a whole load of extra Senedd members in Cardiff Bay. I know where my priorities are, Mr. Speaker. It's with the steel workers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Steelmaking is essential to our national security, as is reaching net zero. The problem is the Welsh Labour government can't make its mind up which is more important. After trying to kill off the steel industry with their green measures, they're now complaining this government isn't doing enough to support it. Does the honourable gentleman think that they don't really know their ACAS from their Nalgo?
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman makes a very good point, but I would also say that the government have looked very carefully at this. There is very little steel being produced by Port Talbot going into the defence industry, but the defence industry is being supplied with steel from an electric arc furnace by Sheffield Forge Masters, and there's absolutely no reason why an electric arc furnace built at Port Talbot, using support from the UK government, cannot help support our defence industry in years to come.
Emma Hardy.
Question number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have regular discussions with ministerial colleagues on a range of topics, including on justice matters. The government is committed to supporting victims. By 2025, we will have quadrupled funding in England and Wales for victim and witness support service from 2010 levels.
Emma Hardy.
Mr. Speaker, 9 in 10 crimes went unsolved in Wales in the last 6 months. What does the Minister say to the victims of the 82,000 unsolved crimes?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would point to this government's record on crime. Last week's Office of National Statistics crime survey shows drops in all major crime types, an average reduction of around 50%. Violent crime is down 51%, neighbourhood crime is down 48%, and theft is down 46%. That's due in part to the fact that this government has met its commitment to provide 20,000 extra police officers, and my own force, Dyfed-Powys, has now got an extra 143 officers.
Robin Miller.
Question 11.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, I have regular discussions with Cabinet colleagues and delivery teams in DLUC on the progress of Levelling Up Fund projects in Wales, and I look forward to hearing more about the projects which are taking place in the honourable gentleman's constituency.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The more mynydd sea to mountain active travel route in the Conway Valley received an £18.6 million boost through levelling up funds, and the projects will make a positive difference to communities in Glanconwy, in Betws-y-Coed and Trefrw. Apart from unlocking the Conway Valley to visitors, it will help young people get to school safely and workers to their jobs. Now, I meet regularly with Conway Council on progress on those projects. What is my right honourable friend doing to ensure that levelling up funds are being delivered effectively in Wales?
Mr Speaker, can I firstly congratulate my honourable friend for being such a champion of levelling up fund schemes in his own constituency. The levelling up funds have allowed us to commit to keep our post-Brexit promise to ensure that Wales continues to be generously funded. And Mr Speaker, it is one of many such projects, such as the levelling up funds, the free ports and investment zones that are ensuring Wales levels up.
Like the towns and villages I represent, coalfield communities in Wales are still bearing the brunt of deindustrialisation. I'm delighted that we're going to have a debate tomorrow on miners and mining communities, and I encourage Welsh colleagues to attend. Can the Minister tell us what steps he's taken to ensure that levelling up funding in Wales and across the coalfields in the UK is targeted at the most deprived, left behind areas that have suffered most?
Mr Speaker, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right to say that we do need to target the areas most in need, but that is exactly what this government has been doing. And it's not just been about levelling up funds, Mr Speaker. We have had 4 growth deals going on across the length and breadth of Wales, 3 rounds of levelling up funding. We've had 2 investment zones, 2 free ports, an electrified rail line in North Wales and an electrified arc in South Wales. And the reality is, Mr Speaker, that while we are committed to levelling up, the Welsh Labour government are committed to levying further taxes on people and businesses in Wales.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, can I say that recent exchanges have been lively to the point where it's becoming difficult for colleagues to hear what is being said clearly, and there has been an escalation in unhelpful exchanges across the floor of the House from sedentary positions and the attempted use of props. Some of the language used in questions has also fallen short of the standards and good temper and moderation that should characterise the proceedings of this House. I know there is a general election approaching, but I would urge honourable members on both sides of the House to exercise greater self-restraint in their choice of words and in their general behaviour, both when they are asking a question and when they are not. We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Joanna Cherry.
Number 1, please, Mr Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, on Monday I met the families of Grace O'Malley Kumar, Barnaby Webber and Ian Coates, who were killed in Nottingham. I assured them that we would do whatever it takes to get the answers that they want. And Mr Speaker, following constructive dialogue over past months, I welcome the significant steps the DUP have taken to make restoration of the executive possible. I also thank the other political parties in Northern Ireland for the patience that they have shown. After 2 years without an executive, there is now the prospect of power sharing back up and running, strengthening our union, giving people the local accountable government that they need, and offering a brighter future for Northern Ireland. Our honourable friend, the Northern Ireland Secretary, will be making a statement shortly. Mr Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last week I met with a constituent who was employed not by the post office but by a supermarket who operated a franchise post office. She was wrongly accused of dishonesty as a result of the faulty Horizon system, and she was put through a disciplinary process by her employers, the supermarket. This has had a very profound impact on her life. She's not alone, there are others in her position, and yet there's no provision for compensating people who worked in franchise post offices like her. Will the Prime Minister give me a commitment to include these victims in the Horizon scandal compensation scheme?
Well, first of all, can I say I'm very sorry to hear about the Honourable Lady's constituent's case. As I've said, this was an awful miscarriage of justice, and everyone affected deserved not just justice but also compensation and answers. I'll make sure that we look into the precise details of her constituent's case, and surely there will be others like that, and make sure that the Minister gets back to her with all due haste.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sustainable aviation fuel plays a significant part in the sector's decarbonisation. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, commit to further policies for a SAF mandate to generate greater demand, for a revenue support mechanism such as other sectors, solar and wind power generation as well, and so that work starts by the end of next year on the 5 promised sustainable aviation plants here in the UK?
Prime Minister.
I can give my honourable friend the assurance that we are committed to ensuring the SAF mandate will be in place by 2025. And by mandating the use of sustainable aviation fuel, not only will we be able to deliver carbon savings, but also create a brand new UK market. And as one of the steps in introducing the revenue certainty mechanism that he talks about by 2026, DfT will be consulting in the spring this year on options for how that should work in practice.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in welcoming the DUP statement about the return of the Northern Ireland Executive? This is an important moment, and we now need all sides to work together to get Stormont back up and running for the people of Northern Ireland. Mr. Speaker, I too met the families of Grace, Barnaby and Ian on Monday, and it's impossible to express in words the horror that they've been through and continue to go through. And we must all redouble our efforts to do everything that we can to help them with their campaign. And of course, Mr. Speaker, this week, 2 young lives, 16-year-old Max and 15-year-old Mason, were taken in Bristol. And I know the whole House will join me in sending condolences to their families and their friends. Mr. Speaker, one of the most difficult experiences for any member of this House is speaking to those at the sharp end of this government's cost of living crisis. So nobody could fail to be moved by the plight of the member for Mid Norfolk. His mortgage has gone up £1,200 a month. He's been forced to quit his dream job to pay for it. A Tory MP counting the cost of Tory chaos. After 14 years, have we finally discovered what they meant when they said, "We're all in this together"?
Well, Mr. Speaker, thanks to the mortgage charter that the Chancellor introduced last year, millions of mortgage holders across the country are benefiting from support with their mortgages, because it's important, rather than take the approach that the honourable gentleman just did, is actually focus on the practical support in place to help people who do need help. And someone on a typical mortgage is able to now save hundreds of pounds thanks to those reforms. And actually what we have recently seen is mortgage applications now at a multi-month high as a result of confidence returning. But if he really cared about helping people with the cost of living, Mr. Speaker, he would actually do more to celebrate and acknowledge the fact that thanks to our plan, millions of working people will now start to pay hundreds of pounds less in tax from this month's pay slips, Mr. Speaker. But we all know that's not a priority for him. He said he wanted to back people with the cost of living, but now he has described tax cuts, I read, as salting the earth. His shadow chancellor, it seems, is equally confused. In Davos, she said she did back tax cuts, but back here in Westminster, she called them a scorched earth policy. She obviously can't decide which Wikipedia page to copy this week.
Mr. Speaker, for every £2 he says he's giving people back, he's taking £10 out of their back pocket in higher tax, and he thinks they should be dancing in the street and thanking him. There are 200,000 people, Prime Minister, just like the member for Mid Norfolk, coming off fixed-rate mortgages and paying more each and every month because they crashed the economy. Does the Prime Minister actually know how much their monthly repayments are going up by?
Prime Minister. As I said, Mr. Speaker, someone on a typical mortgage of about £140,000 with 17 years left is currently paying around £800 as a result of the ability to extend their mortgage term or switch to a 6-month only interest-only mortgage. They will be able to save hundreds of pounds, and that is someone on the average mortgage, Mr. Speaker. But again, Mr. Speaker, he says he cares about the cost of living. The thing that would have the biggest impact on everyone's cost of living is the fact that his ideas to spend £28 billion, which we had just confirmed this morning by a shadow Treasury Minister, I heard, confirmed that they remain committed to them, but he has no plan to pay for this £28 billion, Mr. Speaker. No plan at all. And that's typical Labour economics, because they want to keep the spending but drop the payment plan. And I actually saw at the weekend their former leader, his mentor, was clear that they'll make their sums add up with tax rises on people's assets. Their homes, their pensions and their businesses. It's the same old Labour Party, Mr. Speaker. No plan and back to square one with higher taxes.
Mr. Speaker, they've crashed the economy, mortgages are through the roof, they've doubled the debt, and he thinks he can stand there and lecture other people about fiscal responsibility. But he didn't answer the question. Hundreds of thousands of people are coming off fixed-rate mortgages and facing huge mortgage increases. And the Prime Minister won't even do them the courtesy of answering the question. No, he didn't. So I'll ask him again.
I was very clear at the beginning, and I mean that my constituents to hear it. If yours don't, please leave. Keir Starmer.
Does the Prime Minister have any idea how much mortgages are going up by this month for those coming off fixed-rate mortgages?
Prime Minister. Well, again, I'll just point him back to my previous answer, Mr. Speaker, as I went him through. Everyone's situation will be different. As someone on a typical mortgage of around £140,000, who's currently paying £800, will be able to keep their mortgage payment essentially the same by using the facilitations that the Chancellor has put in place. But again, that's what we've done to help people, Mr. Speaker. But again, it's incumbent on him to explain to the British public how his policy of decarbonising the grid by 2030 is going to be funded. He won't give the answers, but helpfully the Shadow Energy Secretary popped up at the weekend in an interview in the Sunday Times. He said they don't need a plan to pay for it, Mr. Speaker, because in his words it will produce real savings and it makes clear economic sense. Now, the Shadow Leader here doesn't want to talk about it at all, but let me tell him, I see all these years later it's the same story. The Right Honourable Member for Doncaster North has carved a promise in stone and everyone else just looks away in embarrassment.
Mr. Speaker, he just doesn't get it. They crashed the economy, mortgages skyrocketing, doubling the debt. They say they're going to max out the government's credit card at the next budget, and he won't.
Order. I think the Chief Whip's getting very carried away. He doesn't want to lead everybody for a cup of tea, does he? Come on.
They have forfeited the right to be lecturing others about the economy. Somebody coming off a fixed-rate mortgage is going to be paying an average of £240 more each and every month. A constant reminder that working people are paying the price for the damage that they've done to the economy. This week, I met one of the employees at Iceland in Warrington, Phil. I'm sure Phil would be...
Order. Mr Gibson. Sorry. Mr Starmer. Order. The same voice keeps appearing again. It won't appear anymore. So I'm just letting you know now. Keir Starmer.
Laughing at an employee at Iceland who's struggling with his mortgage. Shame. He told me that his mortgage is going up by a staggering £1,000 a month, Prime Minister. He doesn't want other averages, other people, other stories. That's what's happening to him. If the member for Mid Norfolk on £120,000 can't afford this Tory government, how on earth can people like Phil?
Well, actually, Mr. Speaker, thanks to the management of the economy, Phil and millions of people like him are now ensuring that inflation is less than half of the rate that it was when we were talking a year ago, putting more money in their pocket. And thanks to this government, Phil and millions of other workers, not just at Iceland, but across the country, are benefiting this month in their pay packet for a tax cut worth hundreds of pounds for someone on an average salary. But I hope he explained to Phil the cost of his policies. Did he explain to Phil how Phil is going to have to pay for his £28 billion green spending spree? How it's going to cost Phil in higher taxes, more coming out of his pay packet? And did he explain to Phil that he'd be better off sticking with our plan rather than going back to square one with him?
I would invite the Prime Minister to get in touch with Phil and explain to him how paying £1,000 more on his mortgage is making him better off, because that's not how he feels. He's just so out of touch. It's unbelievable. Finding hundreds of pounds extra a month, that may not seem like a big deal to the Prime Minister. But let me tell him, most people don't have that sort of money knocking around. And if that wasn't bad enough, Mr. Speaker, this week he told every council in the country to put their council tax up by the maximum of 5%. That's 26 tax rises now, Prime Minister. And he says everything's fine, people are better off. But when people see their mortgages going up, their council tax going up, food prices still going up, who does he expect them to believe? His boasts or their bank account?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, I was puzzled because, again, he resorts, as always, to the politics of envy here. But after recently and repeatedly attacking not just me but the government for lifting the bonus cap, I was genuinely surprised to see that the Shadow Chancellor just today has announced that she now supports the government's policy on the bankers' bonus cap. I don't know if he mentioned that to Phil when he was having a chat with him, but I'm sure he can fill us in. But I can tell him that trust and economic credibility come from sticking to a plan. But it's becoming clear you cannot trust a word that he says. And again, when the Shadow Chancellor says or claims that they won't borrow much, they won't raise Phil's taxes, we now know that those promises simply, again, they just aren't worth the Wikipedia page they were copied from.
Mr. Speaker, I actually didn't expect him to be laughing at Phil. I did not expect him to be laughing at Phil, not addressing.
Hold on. Look, I made this statement very clear. I don't. Prime Minister, it's very serious that we make sure that people hear, both you and the Leader of the Opposition. It matters to the people who watch the proceedings of this chamber, and it's not good in the behaviour that seems to be carried out. Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister just doesn't get how hard it is for millions of people across the country like Phil. That is the primary problem, struggling with their mortgages, their bills, the spiralling cost of living. And the Prime Minister's response is never to take responsibility, show contrition, or even any level of basic understanding. He's so detached, he thinks he can paint a world in which their problems simply don't exist. The problem is he can't even fool his own MPs, let alone anyone else. The member for Mid Norfolk says he's exhausted. He's looking forward to new opportunities outside of Parliament. Why doesn't the Prime Minister do him a favour, call an election, so he and the whole country can move on?
Mr. Speaker, thank you, Mr. Speaker. But whether it's Phil, whether it's everyone else across the country, the plan that we're putting in place is working to help people and we're making progress. Just this week, taking action to stop children from vaping. Just this week, ensuring that people can visit their pharmacies to get the healthcare they need, freeing up millions of GP appointments. And just this week, millions of working people starting to see hundreds of pounds of tax cuts delivered in their pay packet, Mr. Speaker. That is a plan that is working. All he's offering is £28 billion of tax rises. And that is the choice, Mr. Speaker. It's a brighter future with us or back to square one with them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister likes to attend live sport, and so I wonder whether he would join me in welcoming the decision of the Planning Inspector in upholding Rugby Council's rejection of an application for development at Brandon Stadium in my constituency to keep the doors open for it to remain a sporting venue so that future generations will enjoy the thrills and spills of motorcycle speedway and stock cars.
Prime Minister. Well, I join my honourable friend in paying tribute and being proud of actually Britain's rich history in the automotive and motorsport sectors, and the stadium that he talks about is a historic motorsport venue, and whilst it's been a shame to see it fall into disrepair, I hope that the decision he refers to enables a possibility of both speedway and stock car racing to return, and I know that my honourable friend will rightly continue to champion this cause.
SNP Leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr Speaker, when the Tories scrapped the cap on bankers' bonuses in the autumn during a cost of living crisis, the Labour Party rightly opposed it. Yet here we are, just 3 months later, and the Labour Party support scrapping the cap on bankers' bonuses. Shameful. But is the Prime Minister comforted by the fact that he's now no longer alone in this House on being completely out of touch with public opinion?
Well, Mr Speaker, as I said at the time, we supported the decision of the independent regulator because this was the right thing for financial stability. But that, Mr Speaker, is because on this side of the House, we have a set of convictions and we have a plan and we stick to it. But he's absolutely right to point out the flip-flopping and U-turning and no convictions of the party opposite.
Of course, Mr Speaker, scrapping the cap on bankers' bonuses was only made possible due to Brexit. So what the Westminster parties are now telling the public is that it's OK for bankers to have unlimited Brexit bonuses, but for the public sitting at home, struggling to feed their families, they have to suck up and deal with the additional food price cost as a result of Brexit red tape. That is the cost and that is the reality of broken Brexit Britain. Isn't it the case that the great achievement of this Tory government is getting the Labour Party to agree to that bleak future?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, we're actually delivering benefits for people across Scotland, not just least in new free trade deals that are opening up markets for Scottish exporters, free ports that are attracting jobs and investment, the Brexit pubs guarantee, cutting the cost of a pint in Scottish pubs. But when he talks about the cost of living, Mr Speaker, the thing that he could do most to help is make sure that Scotland isn't the highest tax part of the United Kingdom. And it's not just for high earners, Mr Speaker. Everybody earning £28,500 or more is paying more tax in Scotland than they would in England, thanks to the SNP.
Leanna Davison.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. One punch thrown, 2 days on life support, then 3 children left without a father. A 4-year sentence handed down, released after 2, but one grieving mother has to live a life sentence of agony. Sentencing for one-punch killers is not working in this country. Does the Prime Minister agree that now is the time to finally introduce a specific offence and a tougher minimum sentence for one-punch manslaughter?
Prime Minister.
I pay tribute to the work my honourable friend has done in bringing attention to so-called one-punch manslaughter and highlighting, as she knows well, the anguish those cases cause for the families of the victims. And I know the Ministry of Justice has looked very carefully at the amendment that my honourable friend has proposed, and I know that she'll be meeting the Minister for Safeguarding shortly to both discuss her specific amendment and how we might best address the wider issue.
Sir Ed David.
Speaker.
Order. Ed David.
My constituent Millie, a wheelchair user, had a serious accident at a sporting event. Millie was left waiting on the floor in pain for over 2 hours before an ambulance arrived. During her months in hospital since, she's been dropped badly multiple times, left stuck in her bed for days at length. She's even been told to soil herself when there's no one to take her to the toilet. Before all this, Millie was living independently and working, but the prospect of her returning to work is being destroyed by the crisis in the NHS and care system. I'm sure the Prime Minister will agree that no one should ever have to go through what Millie has, so will he look again at our proposals to make sure every patient gets the high-quality care they need?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very sorry to hear about Millie's case, and if there are specific aspects of it that need to be examined, I'm sure the Health Secretary will follow up with the honourable gentleman. And more generally, we want to make sure everyone gets the care they deserve, which is why we're not just investing record sums in the NHS, but ensuring that there are record numbers of doctors, nurses, and new innovative forms of treatment like surgical hubs and virtual wards, all of which is showing that ambulance times that he mentioned are lower today than they were this time last year.
Slane Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The #1 reason for children's hospital admissions in North Devon is for dental treatment. We have no NHS capacity and no orthodontist in Barnstable. Our dentists cannot recruit, even with large golden hellos. The emergency dental plan does seem to have been stuck at the Treasury forever. My right honourable friend uses spare set of keys and pop round and rescue it for us, please. My constituents and I would be ever so grateful.
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend has rightly championed the provision of dentistry in her local area. We're investing £3 billion a year, and the reformed contracts in dentistry from the NHS have improved access while ensuring fairer remuneration for dentists, and we're also providing more financial support for those who need it the most. So around half of the course of treatment last year were delivered to those who are non-paying, both adults and children. But yes, more needs to be done, and that's why our dentistry recovery plan will be published shortly.
Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More than 2 decades ago, the then Prime Minister Tony Blair misled this House by promoting and endorsing the Post Office Horizon IT system as perfect, protecting the large corporation that created it and causing untold harm and damage and misery to innocent people. Can the current Prime Minister think of anything he has promoted in partnership with huge businesses as safe and effective, which has ultimately harmed the British people? And will he use this opportunity to correct that safe and effective statement, or will he choose the same line as Tony Blair, sit back, do nothing, and let the misery just continue to pile up?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as we've been clear, the Horizon scandal is a terrible miscarriage of justice, and we're doing everything that we can to make it right. To what he was more broadly insinuating, let me be unequivocal from this dispatch box that COVID vaccines are safe, Mr. Speaker.
Jill Gideon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The shocking revelations of the Horizon scandal highlighted the Post Office's financial incompetence, and my right honourable friend will know that the public's confidence in the institution is at an all-time low. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that, as high street banks are closing branches across the country, we should look to developing new community banking solutions rather than giving the Post Office sole responsibility for providing access to cash and other banking services in poorly served neighbourhoods?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for a question, but I also just say that we shouldn't mistake conflating this scandal with the actions of many hard-working local postmasters and sub-postmasters, because customers can access cash and banking services through a wide range of channels, including a contract with the Post Office counter service, which does provide a valuable channel. And that I agree with her, though, the importance of access to cash, which is why the government has legislated to protect that as part of the recent Financial Services and Markets Act, and ensures that the vast majority of people should be no more than 3 miles away from such a cash point.
John Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the Nolan principles, integrity, states that holders of public office should not act to gain material benefits for themselves, their family or their friends. Prime Minister, on the 6th of January, you tweeted a link to the Conservative Party website which seemed to scrape people's data and place unwanted cookies on their machines. The Good Law Project is now pursuing. Can the Prime Minister assure the House that no laws have been broken by his party?
Yes. Mr. Speaker, of course our party follows all laws.
Robert Jenrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a first responsibility for government is to fix the housing crisis that young people didn't cause. 3 years ago, we dragged house building in this country up to the highest level since 1987, after the last Labour government left it at its lowest level since the 1920s. But house building is weakening. We need to do more. Will my right honourable friend consider using the budget to do as he and I did together during the pandemic and cut stamp duty to boost housing starts, to reignite the economy, and to support thousands of businesses across our country.
Prime Minister.
Well, my right honourable friend is right to point out that since 2010 we have delivered 2.5 million additional homes, on track to deliver 1 million just in this Parliament, and help over 850,000 families into home ownership through schemes such as Help to Buy and Right to Buy. Obviously, tax decisions are a matter for the Chancellor, but I would point out that our existing stamp duty relief for first-time buyers ensures the vast majority of first-time buyers in our country pay absolutely no stamp duty.
Marshal de Cordova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The APPG on eye health and visual impairment has today published polling that found that nearly half of employers exclude blind and partially sighted people from their workplaces, and 1 in 4 said that they would not be willing to make workplace adjustments. The disability employment gap remains stubbornly at 30%, and the pay gap means that blind and partially sighted people effectively work for free for 47 days of the year. So will the Prime Minister meet with me and sight loss organisations to discuss how we can create a more inclusive workforce?
Prime Minister.
Well, I share the honourable lady's ambition to have an inclusive workforce, and the record in supporting those with disabilities into work over the past several years has been incredibly strong. I know this is something that the Work and Pension Secretary is actively looking at and making sure that our accessibility plan is up to date and inclusive, and I'll ensure that she gets a meeting with the relevant minister.
Sir Michael Ellis.
Mr. Speaker, having visited recently, I know that Israel remains in shock following the rape, murder and butchery of Hamas. All of us want to see a peaceful and demilitarised Palestinian state. However, Hamas remain in control in large parts of Gaza. Their support is growing in the West Bank. Nearly two-thirds of Palestinians in polling reject coexistence with Israel, and the Palestinian Authority has continued to promote hatred of Jews. Does my right honourable friend agree that any recognition of a Palestinian state must address these issues and can only come about as part of a negotiated settlement between Israel and the Palestinians?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the government's position is clear. My honourable friend is right that there are steps and conditions that need to be put in place on this journey. First and foremost, the removal of Hamas from Gaza, a Palestinian-led government in Gaza and the West Bank, a concrete plan to reform and support the Palestinian Authority, a reconstruction plan for Gaza, and a two-state solution which we have long supported. So let me be clear, we stand with Israel, and the terrorist threat that they face must be limited, and Israel's lasting security must be guaranteed.
Neil Hanby.
Mr. Speaker, on the 15th of November last year, I appealed to the Prime Minister to choose de-escalation and peace over violence, death and destruction. He called me naive. So far, over 26,000 souls have perished in Gaza. Shameful. In a powerful and moving open letter in Monday's New York Times, the Jewish Voice for Peace Rabbinical Council cited Deuteronomy. I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life, accusing President Biden of choosing death. If the Prime Minister won't listen to me or the ICJ, will he listen to the Rabbinical Council, or will he call them naive too?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've been clear multiple times that we are concerned, deeply concerned, about the impact of the fighting in Gaza on the civilian population. Too many people have lost their lives, and there is a desperate need for increased humanitarian support in Gaza. I won't go over all the debates we've had about the conditions that are necessary for an immediate pause leading to a sustainable ceasefire, but I can assure the House that we are doing everything that we can to get more aid into the region as quickly as possible.
Kelly Tolhurst.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chatham Docks supports over 800 local high-value jobs which are at risk as the owners are continuing in their pursuit to displace successful businesses such as ArcelorMittal Kent Wire. The Labour Council are failing to honour the commitment they made before the local elections to protect the docks and the jobs. Even their leader, the Right Honourable Member for Holborn and St Pancras, said he was proudly backing Save Chatham Docks campaign. Will my Right Honourable friend meet with me to see how we can protect the docks and save those jobs for my constituents? And isn't this just another example of how Labour and their leaders change their position depending on which way the wind blows?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend has been a constant champion of Chatham Docks, and I am disappointed to hear that the local Labour Council are failing to honour the commitments that they've made. But also, as she points out, I'm not surprised to see that the Leader of the Opposition has said one thing and then consequently done another. The docs support hundreds of jobs, and I join with her in calling on the Council to rethink their approach.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. We now come to the statements. Minister Ledson.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I would like to make a statement on the launch of our Pharmacy First service. Pharmacies are at the centre of our communities, an accessible front door to our NHS for millions of people.